Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I'm Damon Martin.
And I'm Cordyceps Guerra. I'm sorry, Patrick Guerra. What am I talking about? I'm just a regular human not infected by fungal infections in my brain.
Listen, we're reviewing The Last of Us this week, obviously. Two things I want to mention at the top of the show. One, we are going spoilers the entire episode. The final episode's been out for 2 weeks now. It's not that we don't care about the audience that hasn't seen it, but TV's a little different than movies. You know, you're not going to the theater to see it. Everyone's got access to HBO and HBO Max. So I'm kind of not playing the normal like non-spoiler half and spoiler half, because at this point we kind of assume if you're into The Last of Us, you've probably seen it already. Because again, that's how TV works. You generally don't wait a long time to watch it. Also, part two of that is I was not. I don't play video games, so I was totally unfamiliar with this outside of the zeitgeist of pop culture talking about The Last of Us. I want to start the show off right here and give credit where credit's due. When I first heard about this, I heard it was a guy smuggling a girl, immune to the infection across the country because she could be the savior of humanity. That's all I knew about it, but I knew it was a zombie apocalypse. And I was like, okay, this will be interesting. Like, I'm sure it's a different take than what The Walking Dead has done or what George Romero has done, blah, blah, blah. I had no idea going in the first episode that the entire concept of the zombie apocalypse in this series was based upon a fungal infection. And I immediately became fascinated by that. And I was like, what a creative way to do a twist on the zombie apocalypse, genre with a freaking fungal infection as the center of your story.
Oh yeah, no, it's a great way in, and it was kind of I'm like you. I don't play video games very often. I try to, and I knew Last of Us the video game, but I'd never played it. Wildly, very big, very very popular game. But it is a great way into kind of the whole zombie apocalypse genre. And right on the heels of that first episode, I think it's like set there. There's this like talk show set, and it looks like the 1970s, maybe the late 1960s, where this professor is talking about what he fears for the future. And when he says, "Yeah, well, the mean temperature of the world is going to rise in a few decades," scary, scary prediction, that is going to allow for fungus to be able to control human uh, organic matter as opposed to just dying off once it hits a certain temperature. And you go, oh, well, that sucks. Hope that doesn't turn into anything really bad and dangerous. Turns out it turns into this like terrible fungal infection apocalypse. You think athlete's foot sucks. You think crotch rot sucks. This is much worse. This is much, much worse. And it turns into this really harrowing adventure that's really well done by Craig Mazin and company. And I was excited because I did see Chernobyl. Did you watch that?
I did. I love Chernobyl. It was incredible series.
Chernobyl's amazing. It's a really, really good series. And if you haven't watched it, you should. And fair warning, it's like maybe even scarier than The Last of Us, truth be told. It's like but it's because it's a genuinely true story about something that actually happened. And then I watched a show called The Chernobyl Tapes. There was a documentary called Chernobyl Tapes. And it was like word for word, almost the same thing happened in the fictional show Chernobyl that happened in actual real life. So I was on board right away, knowing that it was Craig Mazin, knowing that he had done Chernobyl and just knocked that completely out of the park. I was excited to see what came of this show, and then it turned out to be a genuine worldwide phenomenon.
And it's horror television, which I know we've talked about briefly. This is the second horror television show we've talked about, because of course we did a full review of Stranger Things season 4. That was another global phenomenon, and that show, obviously that show has leaned into science fiction and horror. This show is more straight horror because you're dealing with like a zombie apocalypse kind of situation, but there were some truly harrowing moments in this show. Like, typically horror shows, I've said this on the podcast before, I think horror shows are tougher to do
Yeah.
because, you kill off characters, it's harder to, maintain cast season to season. And horror is a genre that's a little harder to transform from movies into TV, in my opinion. Like, it's just a harder genre to adapt that way. And The Last of Us, I was really curious because listen, we've all seen zombie apocalypse movies and TV shows. The Walking Dead being the biggest, out there. And for the most part, I enjoyed The Walking Dead, but the show felt like it went on way too long, and they deviated so much from the source material at points that it kind of disheartened me a little bit as a comic book reader, but not like to the point where I was like, oh my god, this is egregious and you can't do that. Listen, they're going to change the source material. That's how adaptations work. You got to get that out of your head right away. But The Walking Dead, I felt like at times that show lost its way in a lot of different directions. Like it just got mired in, we got to do 16 episodes a season, and so we're just going to stretch out this material as far as we can because this show's getting huge ratings, and we want to continue doing it and getting huge ratings and huge advertising dollars and all that kind of stuff. Now, I'm not saying the creators and the writers and the people behind that show didn't put heart into it. They absolutely did. And there's a lot of The Walking Dead I really enjoyed. But when it's all about that, you do sometimes lose your sense of purpose. And with The Last of Us, it felt like this was a very focused story. It really does go episode to episode, and you're really just following along with two main characters, Joel and Ellie, of course, played by the great Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey, who you both previously appeared on Game of Thrones. And really, they're our through line. Like, there's only really another couple characters that even appear in 2 episodes, much less, the whole season. So there's like 2 other characters that appear in multiple episodes. So it's really a different kind of take on this. And it is a genuinely harrowing season in terms of, like, there's some legitimate scares. Like, there's some really terrifying moments. And the storytelling in this show is so utterly brilliant. Like, I was not attached to the source material. I've seen a lot of videos online of people who played and loved the game, and they've done comparisons between the show and the game. And there's a lot of it that's, like, eerily the same. Like, they kept a lot of it identical. But it's just so amazing to see this kind of adaptation done on such a scale, and also for a network in HBO, that I'm not saying that HBO doesn't care about ratings. This is now their highest rated debut show. Obviously it's huge, did better numbers than House of the Dragon, which I mentioned, which is another monstrous show. But HBO ultimately tends to care more about the creativity, and they're for lack of a better word, they're award whores, Patrick. They like awards. They want to win all the Emmys. They want to win everything. And then by extension, they get the ratings, right? That's what they did with The Last of Us. They turned this into a show that 100% they're going to get nominated for a ton of Emmys next year or later this year when the Emmys happen. 100% they're going to get nominated for everything, and rightfully so. It's a brilliantly, beautifully executed version of this story, and I was enamored from start to finish. Even you mentioned in that first episode, just a little, you get a little glimpse into like the first 20 minutes of where the cordyceps infection comes from. Just the way they did it. Talk show, the doctor in Indonesia talking about it. It was just a really great setup. And then, you go right into it. It's just nonstop from there. And it is an emotional show. It is a terrifying show. It is an incredibly well acted show. It just really encompasses everything you'd want in television. And then on top of that, it's horror.
Oh yeah, it's horror done by HBO, which if you're going to do horror TV, if you're going to do TV, you kind of want to do HBO first before anything else if you can. There's a couple other good ones out there. Netflix is pretty good. Apple TV is giving people a run for their money in their infancy. But HBO starts with quality and insists on ending with quality, and there's very rare instances where they've had a misstep. So right away, you start in a good place. And you brought up The Walking Dead earlier. And now The Walking Dead, as far as I'm concerned, the first 3 seasons of that show are downright fantastic. They're kind of amazing, actually. And that's like very, very much a horror movie, a horror show, because it's based on a very classic idea. Zombies are incredibly, just steeped in the horror culture. So you start with something that's incredibly horrific off the jump. And like a fungal infection's not quite as horrific. But when I think about the 2 shows and I think about what The Last of Us has done, that really impressed me, is that you learn very, very quickly in the very first, excuse me, my phone's ringing. I don't even know why that's happening. Okay. Sorry. You learn in the very first episode what the goal is right away. You already know. It's almost like you're starting, it's like the start of a movie. You already know that this guy, Joel, is going to need to take this young woman, Ellie, to try and find a cure for this damn thing. I mean, they take a good amount of time to set it up, of course, but that setup is, to world build this incredible world that's gonna be laid bare in front of you over the next 9 episodes. But you know the goal. You know why the first step is being taken right away. You kind of have to learn that with The Walking Dead. You kind of have to. I would argue even by the end, you're still never quite sure what the goal is. Like, you really don't. I'll confess, I didn't even finish The Walking Dead, and I was very dedicated to it. I think for a show that I watched for maybe 10 years, I can't believe I actually one day just put it down and never came back to it. But that was a show that overstayed its welcome. Will The Last of Us overstay its welcome? I don't know. I don't know what the long-term plans are. There's definitely a season 2 coming, and there should be, because basically season 1 ends on a certain note. We'll get to that. But yeah, like right away, I knew why I needed to sit down and lock in. You got this character of Joel who suffers a great loss right at the beginning of this fungal pandemic. And then later on down the road, 20 years later, right? We do a 20-year jump.
Yeah.
20 years into this pandemic, which sounds horrific for people right now. 20 years into this pandemic, he's a broken man who is given an opportunity to find his brother, right? His family was fractured in the beginning of the pandemic. He lost his daughter day 2 of the pandemic, I believe it was.
Yeah, very quickly.
Yeah, really quickly, and him and his brother have since lost each other, and he needs to find his brother. He believes he's somewhere in the Wyoming territories, and he has this opportunity to find him by taking this cargo with him. The deal is, we'll give you some supplies, some things you need, if you will take this girl Ellie up to this base up there, and it's this group, the Fireflies, who are kind of anti-government.
The rebels. They're the rebels.
Yeah, they're rebels. Yeah, the government has sort of morphed into this weird police state that is not truly helping the people, and then there's this rebel group, the Fireflies, and they want to change humanity for the better, and they believe that this young girl Ellie has inside her what is the cure for this cordyceps infection, and there starts our story. And you're just in. Now, Pedro Pascal has a habit of finding orphans in his shows and taking them under his wing and going off into the distance and trying to make it work. So I was already locked in, and it was great. And you get these two great actors, Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey, to top line your show. It's kind of a can't miss. And then you add in a completely different take on zombies, which is zombies infected by fungus. It's all happening right here, right? That concept of the fungus taking over something is a real thing. Those fungus take over ants and insects and make them move around without brains in their head. It's crazy shit. It can really happen. They're just saying, hey, let's scale up to people, and that's downright terrifying.
Yeah, it was really, that to me, like, I marvel at that. Like, what a creative way. Because I remember reading about the zombie fungal infection in ants, where like it kills the ant, takes over their brain, and basically controls their body. And they explain all this in the early part of the show. It's not possible to be humans because our body temperatures are too high, blah blah blah. But as they said, they adapt, and the fungus is adapted. And what's crazy about this show, if you think about 9 episodes, that doesn't sound like a lot. It sounds like a pretty average first season for a television show. But if you think about where we start, meeting Joel and his daughter Sarah at the very beginning of the show, to where we end with Joel and Ellie arriving in Wyoming, it feels like 3 movies wrapped into one. But the crazy thing and the amazing thing about The Last of Us is none of it feels rushed. Like, none of it feels like it was forced. There are 2 particular standalone episodes. One, which I know we're going to talk about eventually, Bill and Frank. It was a incredible episode, just focused on 2 characters really the entire episode. And then there's an episode later where it's like a backstory flashback of how Ellie's character first got bitten and first got officially infected with the cordyceps infection. So 2 episodes you kind of draw out where they're barely in the two lead characters are, well, I won't say they're not in the episode, but like they're not the current storyline is not the main focus.
Mm-hmm.
The flashback involves Ellie, but it has nothing to do with Joel. Like, he has nothing to do with the flashback because they didn't know each other at this point. And then the other one, Bill and Frank, that's literally just 2 characters that you see in that episode and we never see again. Yet, it never feels rushed. It never feels like we're missing story. There's a version of The Last of Us. I know we always like to talk, there's a version of the show. We've talked about this a million times. There's a version of this show that gets Walking Deaded, where they turn just the first 2 episodes into a whole season. Just escaping the Boston quarantine zone. That's like the big exposition of the first couple episodes is basically Joel teaming up with Ellie and his sort of girlfriend, kind of partner, Tess, and they're escaping the Boston quarantine zone. Boston quarantine zone is run by a group called Fedra. They're like the new police state government that runs everything. And there's a version of this where they do the entire first season just around those two episodes, where it's just about escaping the Boston quarantine zone and getting on the road. Now, I'm not saying you couldn't have done that well. There's a version where I think you could do that well, because there's a lot in there in that first couple episodes. But the way they do it in this show, and they don't, there's not a lot of hand holding. They're just understanding the audience is capable of knowing what's going on here and following the story, and they don't need to be spoon-fed a lot of exposition, a lot of unneeded dialogue, a lot of unneeded characters being introduced. It's a very like trim the fat kind of show. And this first season follows the first game, The Last of Us. There's a second game, and there's a second season, and they've said that the second game will take more than 1 season, but I'm imagining this show's going to run maybe 3 seasons at most.
Yeah,
I don't see
probably
it going beyond that, and I appreciate that because, again, I think this goes into HBO. I want to applaud them because, like, when The Watchmen, which was another just unbelievable series developed by Damon Lindelof, the guy who helped co-create Lost, that first season was amazing. Everyone's like, we want more. And Damon Lindelof said, I don't really want to, this was the one idea I had. I don't really want to do it again. I'm out. And when he was out, HBO was like, all right, well, we're done. Like, if he's not involved, we're not going to do it. And they just ended the show. And they're like, all right. And I appreciate that because, again, there's a version where they're like, no, we got to milk this thing. We got to do a whole season on the Boston quarantine. Then we'll move on to this and this and this. Never felt like that, but it also never felt rushed. It never felt like, oh man, I'm missing out on story. There's only a couple of instances where we even go like kind of like a cliffhanger sort of from like episode to episode even. Like there's only even a couple examples of that. A lot of it is standalone 1 episode arcs, but it's a really, really awesome storytelling. And I mean, geez, talk about like raising the stakes. Like pretty much everybody you meet in this show, short of Joel, Ellie, and Joel's brother, why am I forgetting his name?
Tommy.
Tommy. Pretty much everyone else you meet in the show dies before the first season's over. Like you meet them and they're dead within 60 minutes. But it's also wild how you can get so connected to them in that 60 minutes, and it never feels forced. It never feels manipulative. Like we're going to introduce you to these characters just to kill them. Never feels like that. But you also understand the stakes have never been higher. And that's one thing this show gets done so well is that you are never, ever comfortable in this show. You never feel like, whew, I can just take a breath. Never happens in this show.
No, it never happens in the show. And you mentioned like characters dying off constantly. It's kind of interesting what they do now with that 20-year time jump. I mean, they've already done 20 years of this. They're not trying to figure it out. They're not trying to figure out what's happening. It's already happened. It's already happened. Fedra took over a long time ago. There was no rise of Fedra that we had to go through. They skipped way ahead. There's kind of like this little rule in writing, which is in screenwriting. It's get in late, get out early. So the rule is like anytime you get into a scene, get into it later than you think. Explain less than what you think. Like establish more just in the first few seconds. And this is kind of a little like a macro version of that. They get in way late into this pandemic. They get into a point where they're already talking about a cure. They've already kind of figured it out. Now it's taken 20 years and it's ravaged the world, but they're there. So we're in way late. We're in kind of at an inflection point where it's like, hey, maybe we can actually fix this thing. We found a kid that can actually potentially create a cure. Another thing they do that's really interesting, and it goes back to the idea of the characters being knocked off constantly, is most of your zombie apocalypse shows are ensemble pieces. This is not an ensemble piece. You don't have that. You don't have the need to kind of to let each of the different people in the stories their own arcs breathe, because there's only two arcs that actually really matter. There's only Joel and Ellie. Those are the arcs that matter. All the rest are people who have already been deeply entrenched in this pandemic. And so you don't spend as much time with those people. They've all kind of lived their lives. There's a rare instance where you do. You go over and you meet Bill and his boyfriend, or his husband. Frank, yeah. You do get that moment. That's kind of the rare moment. And it's a great moment, by the way. We'll get to it. But you don't need the, I guess, all the space you would need for an ensemble piece in a show like Walking Dead, for instance. Walking Dead probably needed 7 seasons. It didn't need whatever it ended on, 14 seasons or something like that.
11 seasons total.
11 it felt like 28 seasons. But it needed, truth be told, it needed more room to breathe, because there was time where you needed to spend more time with Rick, time with Michonne, time with Carol, time with Daryl. You had a lot of people to juggle. You don't have a lot of people to juggle here. So you get right to it. You get in late and you get to the goal. Like, the goal is already set. The goal is set day one. And that idea that, like, pretty much every episode somebody's going to die is pretty intense. Now, in a show like Walking Dead, for instance, or a show like Stranger Things, ancillary characters might die, but your major characters don't. And really people like Tess, people like Kathleen or Marlene, they should feel safe in a typical zombie apocalypse show. And it's like, no, you're probably going to see those people die rather quickly. They're probably not going to make it. So that was something that was a little different. And it gives you that air of like, well, who's dying this week? It's going to be somebody that matters for sure. You know what I mean? It's going to be somebody very established. And the efficiency of the storytelling, again, credit to Craig Mazin and company for just going like, we're going to show you this person. We're going to show you how they matter very deeply to the story. And then we're going to kill them right in front of you. It's sickening, but in the best kind of way. That's like appointment TV, where you're just like, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to really, really hope that Joel or Ellie don't die this episode. They're probably not going to, because it's super popular. But somebody else I'm going to like or admire or think is going to be a great villain for a long arc is going to go. And that, you know what it kind of reminds me of? Did you ever see the show? I only saw bits and pieces of it, Black Summer.
No, I didn't, but I'm familiar with what it is. Yeah.
It's an intense zombie apocalypse show, and it kind of makes The Walking Dead look like Disney. You know what I mean? It's like, that's a zombie apocalypse show where it's like people are just dying left and right constantly, and they like move on to the next person almost immediately. They don't quite do that. This Last of Us here kind of strikes a balance where it's like, you are going to keep Joel and Ellie for the most part through the entire show, but everybody else is going to die. So that keeps the dread level just like right above your eyebrows the entire time. And I dig that. And what I also dig, Damon, tell me what you think, that we get a lot of the, what do we call them? I don't even know what to call these zombie things.
The infected is really what they are.
Yeah, I guess,
they have a graduation of difference. You know, they get to a point where they're called clickers, where their face.
Yeah, there's a different type. Yeah, clickers are a different type.
They basically turned into their face. Their head is turned into like a giant mushroom sprout, more or less, and they start growing almost like body armor, because the mushroom or the fungus continues to evolve and affect, and then eventually they get to a phase we actually see in one of the episodes where they turn into a full-on like monstrous, like almost just giant zombie mushroom, like fungus, where
big shroom tank.
Yeah, like just like it's just huge. Like the whole, it's really, boy, I tell you what, man, the like zombies in general don't really creep me out. The zombies in this show creep me the fuck out. The way the cordyceps virus works in this show, and the way people get infected by the fungus, is really creepy and really unnerving. Like, it's really disturbing, the visuals of these zombies.
Yeah, it's fun and it's disgusting, by the way, which it's something I hate even more. It's like, oh God, like I hate the idea of athlete's foot. Like, just imagine your whole head is an athlete's foot. Like, it's disgusting. It's so gross. So you got body horror and just the horror of this kind of unique type of infected person. And then, like, the idea, this is the part I really love, is that it is a network. So it's like this fungus is spread everywhere, and it can talk to fungus way far away. So it has the ability. So if you're face to face with a few of these infected, they have the ability to call more from a far distance because they are connected through this huge kind of web like network that runs through the ground. Because fungus, like if you've ever had black mold in a place, you kind of see how it kind of stretches and kind of moves out. Well, it started in one place and now it's going everywhere. That's what the infection is like. That's what this zombie apocalypse. If you shoot a bunch of zombies in a show like The Walking Dead, they're usually not going to call a bunch of others around. In this instance, that happens. You shoot one, and as it's dying, it's like, hey, they're over here. Come get them. And you're like, oh, shit. No, like you're not safe. You got to keep moving. So it creates that idea of there's no good place to rest either. And then when you do find a good place to rest, Damon, let's be honest, what any good zombie apocalypse show does is realize that the true horror is what humans are capable of when they are desperate. So you're not even safe when you run into a regular group of humans because there's no regular group of humans anymore.
Yeah, I mean that is a staple of the zombie genre. I mean George Romero displayed that in Night of the Living Dead when the lead character, stops the zombies, but then the government shoots him dead. You know what I mean? Like that's just to Dawn of the Dead. They're working in the mall. It's all fine. They're getting along, and then it's the motorcycle gang that breaks in, and that's what causes everything to turn to shit. Um, every great zombie show has that cautionary tale of what humanity becomes, and also I want to compliment the Last of Us. We talked about how creepy the zombies, the infected zombies, are in this show. The one thing I was talking about before called a bloater, the big giant, monstrous tank of a fungus creature. We only see that once during the show. One thing I want to applaud this show is I'll be honest, like we get 9 episodes. I think we only really see infected people in like 4 of them,
Yeah.
4 or 5.
Yeah, that was my whole point.
Like we're not seeing just like hordes. It's not just like carnage candy for the sake of we got to make a big effects driven show. When the infected show up, first off, you realize really quickly this is not just like zombies where you just you pump a bullet in their head and they're dead. Like you know what I mean? Like is that possible? Yes, but as these infected zombies continue to evolve and grow and sprout more disgusting fungus, they become harder to kill. Their brains are harder to kill. It's harder to get bullets through their brains. All these different things that make them like harder and harder to kill. You realize that if you had 100 of these infected zombies coming at you, you ain't making it. Like you're done. Like you might as well just go and cash in. One zombie in this show is dangerous. Like one infected person is incredibly dangerous. Much less like 10. So they really raise the stakes with that in this show. And when they use the infected, they use it so effectively that it raises the stakes and it really makes it a harrowing situation. Like when you're in that episode with Ellie with her friend at Riley where they're going to the mall and there's one infected. That's it, just one. But even that is terrifying because they use it so well that you don't just like, oh, it's another zombie. It's another zombie.
Yeah.
That's why, like, I know it's almost like we're doing this like a co-production with The Walking Dead, but like, The Walking Dead got to the point where, one zombie never felt like a threat anymore. 2 zombies
No.
never really felt like a threat anymore. Then they had to do when they did the hordes, when they did these huge giant herd of zombies. Then it was scary again because you got freaking 100,000 zombies coming at you. That's impossible to stop. It's like a train rolling at you, and you're not going to stand in front of it and not get mauled over. This show uses it so well that you don't like and you fear them. They're terrifying. One of them is terrifying, and then the human element gets mixed. I mean, there's a character in like episode 7 named David who you meet who is like a preacher, and he seems like a pretty calm normal guy, and then you realize he might be the worst of the worst in this entire infected situation, this entire pandemic, and this entire zombie apocalypse. But again, this is the cautionary tale we have in every great zombie story: is humanity is the real terror. Desperate humans are capable of anything and everything and terrible things. And we learn that time and time and time again in this show, where, you really feel for it. You're really like, man, like maybe the cordyceps infection had the right idea. Jeez, like these people are just awful. And the way they do it, and again, like I said, there's only maybe 5 episodes where the infected really play a major part, honestly. Like the first one, again, of course. But like, even like the last episode, the final episode of the season, I don't know that we see anybody infected at all.
No, I don't
And
think we
and,
do.
and but it doesn't lower the scale of the stakes of it all. Like you don't feel like, oh, we didn't have a zombie, because that was a huge complaint of The Walking Dead, where I felt like they got too comfortable. There weren't enough zombies. They never felt threatened. This show, you're always feeling threatened. You're feeling threatened from the moment the show starts until the moment the show ends. You never feel safe. As I said, you're sitting on the edge of your seat, clutching your pearls, so to speak, the entire episode of every single episode. I want to get into categories in a second, Patrick, but this entire show, just the way it unraveled, it was just a really well done execution of how to do a serialized series. Which, for those that don't know the terminology, there's procedural and serialized. Procedural means a show like, let's say, NCIS or
Law and Order.
CSI, where it's like a case of the week. You have characters that go from episode to episode, and there are through lines in terms of the story, but really you're focused on that case of the week, that medical case or that police case or whatever, Law and Order. Yeah, you're focusing on that thing, and then
and that problem will get wrapped up that week. It's going to get wrapped up in that episode.
Yeah. Serialized television is The Sopranos, is Game of Thrones, is The Last of Us, where it's all, it's one big story. You know what I mean? You're from day one till the final episode, it's all one big story. But this show really does it in a weird way, where it's serialized, but it's also procedural, because you are moving from episode to episode. You are meeting Bill and Frank in episode 3. You followed their entire life story through one episode, never felt cheated, never felt like you're missing something. You fall in love with the characters. Let's just be honest. You fall in love with the characters, and then by the end, they're gone. We never see them again. And listen, real quick before we get to Canada, one thing I want to mention: we talk about the stakes are so high. Even I got duped. I'm not the one to get duped by horror shows, by zombie shows, because I just assumed. But again, I didn't know The Last of Us. I didn't play the game, so I wasn't familiar with the story. When they started out on this journey, it was Joel, Ellie, and Tess, played by the great Anna Torv, who of course was in Fringe. She was in Mindhunter. Great actress. I mean, it's going to be the three of them, because that seemed like the direction we were going. Episode 2, it's over. She dies in episode 2. In a really creepy way, she dies with the freaking infected zombie, like, making out with her and spreading. Oh, my God. That's one of the creepiest scenes in this entire show. But that right there, I was like, oh, okay, so we're going to have 3 people journeying across, like, the United States. Nope. No, you sure as shit aren't. She's dying in episode 2. The stakes have never been higher.
I knew just that much. I knew Tess was going to die because I knew that the video game story was about Ellie and Joel. So that much didn't get me, but I'm glad it got you. I'm glad it got Damon, because it is hard to get Damon. He knows a little too damn much about storylines. But yeah, this show, again, the way it's structured is really great. It's like we're going to get in way late, 20 years into a pandemic. We're going to invest in 2 characters very specifically. They're going to have a very specific goal, and the first half of the show is them kind of clawing their way out of quarantine zones where there is a dense amount of these monsters, and they are going to get out into the open, out into the more isolated areas. There is less likely to be infected. There's very few infected out there, but out there is going to be these weird strongholds of fucked up people. And that's even worse. It's always scarier to just run into those kind of people. So it's just one clean story that beginning to end told us something great. And boy, the ending. Oh, we're going to talk about that in a minute here, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. Well, let's get into categories, because this is obviously a little different, because we're talking about a television show. We're talking about a full season versus just one movie. we're not going to do best performance because, I mean, there's really two performances in the show. Now, I do want to give credit where credit's due. There's a lot of incredible performances in this series. Of course, Nick Offerman as Bill, and Murray Bartlett as Frank. I hope they both win Emmys. Like, I hope
I'm sure they will.
They're incredible. Well, actually, probably they probably both can't. One of them can because that's the way Emmys work.
Oh yeah, that's true.
But they're both going to get nominated. They're incredible. Melanie Linsky is in this show. She shows up. Of course, she's from Yellow Jackets, which is a show I absolutely love. She's incredible in this show. She
got 2 episodes too.
Yeah, she got 2 episodes. Then you have the guys who play Sam and who am I forgetting? The little why am I forgetting the name?
Oh yeah, Sam and Henry. Yeah,
Henry and Sam. Henry and Sam are incredible. Lamar Johnson, who plays Henry, and then a little boy,
Kevon Woodard.
Yeah, Kevon Woodard, who plays Sam, a deaf 8-year-old, and he's actually deaf in real life. Everything, every piece of this show fits and does really well, and also deserves a ton of credit for just incredible performances. Gabriel Luna as Tommy. I don't want to keep going down the line, but my point is there are a lot of incredible performances. But we got to talk about the 2 main ones, which is Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey as Joel and Ellie. Wow. Hand out awards right now, folks. They're that good.
That's it. We already know the Emmys are wrapped up for next year in the dramatic series. Now, this is going to be interesting because this happened to one of your and mine favorite shows of all time, which is True Detective Season 1. They put themselves in the regular season or regular series categories, and they won no awards. If they'd have put themselves in limited series or I think anthology, they have a special category for limited series, that year True Detective would have cleaned up, and it didn't. It's insane because it is that season 1 is probably the best season of television that ever happened ever. Don't fight me on this. Don't at me on this. That's just the fucking truth.
It is the GOAT. It is the best season of television. Sorry, I just want to weigh in.
But you're right. And my question is, will HBO wisely go, this is a limited series, and clean the fuck up? They'll win every award if they go limited series. If they go regular dramatic series, they might not. That's a really weird thing that could happen there. There might be too much competition, and I think they might even have competition against House of the Dragon, which I think they could beat. Lest we forget, House of the Dragon actually fucking ruled and was amazing, and I loved it. But yeah, listen, we're right here. The point is, we're talking about Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey, who, mentioning Game of Thrones, came from Game of Thrones. Now, Pedro's had tons of work, and he's actually been a working actor for quite some time, but really we met him as the Red Viper, right? That was his name?
Yes, Oberyn Martell.
Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper, and he stole that fucking show. He came in, was like, check me out, and everybody fell in love with him, and then the Mountain made his head into, bolognese. So he starts on that show. Then he gets The Mandalorian. Okay, Mandalorian's fucking awesome. We all love that, but you never see Pedro's face. You just don't see it. And he's got a few cool roles in a couple of movies, including the one that was last year with Nicolas Cage. It was a ton of fun. This show shows you why you are absolutely in love with Pedro Pascal. This is why he's a zaddy. This is why he's baby girl, but a 47-year-old man. Like, you get the whole breadth of the ability of Pedro Pascal in this show. You see the rage and the manliness and the action adventure capabilities of a Pedro Pascal. Then you see the complexity. Then you see the sadness behind the eyes. The guy who's suffering a deep loss in his life and is damaged and has done some dark things that you can only imagine because they didn't go through them. He spent 20 years doing some fucked up shit because he's trying to work through what he's gone through. He carries that whole. He is a lock to win whatever he gets, even if they do decide to do regular dramatic series over limited. I think he's a lock. I don't think you can deny him this year. Now let's talk a little bit about Bella Ramsey, because Bella also came from Game of Thrones, and we know Bella's character, Lady Mormont, was kind of a breakout character, but that was kind of all we knew about Bella. Now Bella shows us a whole lot. Damon, I mean, you were a Game of Thrones guy just as much as I was, but now you see Bella in a whole new light here.
Yeah, Bella Ramsey, her first ever acting job was Game of Thrones. That was her first acting job.
Yeah.
Incredible performance. There's not a day that goes by that I don't watch The Last of Us and hear Bella Ramsey go, "But you refused the call," like she did when she was berating the Lords of the North for not backing Jon Snow. Sorry, Game of Thrones talk. She's really good in this show, and she does such a great job because what we learned very early on about Ellie is she's lost everyone. She never had anyone, to be honest. We learned late in the series that her mother died while she was giving birth because she got bitten by an infected, which we learned that's kind of like the source of her immunity, is that her body was she just got infected as her mother was getting bitten and dying from a zombie, and then they kill the zombie, they kill the infected, and she survives and becomes immune to the cordyceps infection. But every person that's gotten close to her since then, and we do a great flashback episode where we learn this, like she's just been on her own. So she's kind of learned, very much when we meet these two characters, Joel and Ellie, they've both put up walls, hard, tall, long walls that they don't want to get broken down because they're, in Joel's case, he lost a daughter, and that's just broken him. I mean, it just absolutely broke him. His entire world was his daughter, and she died very early on. And so he had nothing really to live for. And we learned in the final episode he actually tried to commit suicide. Like, he had nothing to live for. Meanwhile, Ellie, every person that was supposed to love her, mom and dad were not there from birth. They were gone. And then every person around her, she just grew up in a world where they all died. They all moved on. They all left her. They all died. Her best friend, who she, also had a huge crush on at the time, just abandoned her one night, left their dorm room and never came back. And then when she does come back, she learns that her best friend is joining the Fireflies and she's getting sent to another camp, somewhere else. I can't remember where it was, where she's getting sent, Pittsburgh or whatever.
Yeah.
She's sent to another camp, and that's going to be the end of it for them. And this is like another example of somebody leaving. And then she meets Joel.
Well, not only does her best friend and her crush leaving, she dies right in front of her.
She dies right in front of her. And then to make matters even harder for Ellie is that she meets Joel, who is very much, from day one, we understand he's a bit of a father figure. But Joel wants nothing to do with Ellie in that way. He doesn't want to get close to her. He sees her, as you hear in the trailer, "I'm not family. No, you're cargo." She's a thing to him at the beginning of this show. She's nothing more than a thing he has to protect to get paid, more or less. I know it's a lot more complex than that, but I'm just like narrowing it down. Like, he is trying to complete a mission, and she is just the cargo he's got to carry. That's it. She means nothing to him at that point. But as their relationship continues to evolve, and particularly in the episode where we meet David and Ellie gets kidnapped and she has to basically survive on her own, really for the first time since she met Joel, we see all this come out where we see like how damaged she is and how much she just longs for somebody to love her, for somebody to care about her, for somebody to care whether she lives or dies, because her entire life she feels like nobody cares. And she's kind of grasping onto the immunity card. She's like, "I'm the one who can save the world. That's how people will finally care about me. I can save the world." But then along comes Joel. And by that episode where she meets David and she has to fight for her own survival, and she ends up killing David, and then outside when she runs out, she's just manic and understandably so, covered in blood, terrified. She just survived a horrific situation where she was about to get killed, or worse, as we learned early in the episode, this guy was 6 shades of wacky. I mean, he wanted to marry a 14-year-old girl. It was a really disturbing episode. She runs out of this restaurant butcher shop, runs out, and she's just freaking out. And then, of course, Joel finally finds her, and she's panicked, whatever. And then he holds her tight, and listen, I'm not a parent, you are, but the moment when Joel grabs her and says, "I got you, baby girl," if you didn't cry or at least pull at your heartstrings, you might actually be infected by the cordyceps infection, because that should have pulled at everyone's heartstring. That moment when he says, "I got you, baby girl," and she finally breaks down and cries in his arms.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I don't have kids, but even I was like emotional.
I mean, it pulled at my heartstrings. It didn't make me cry because I also turned around and went, "Shut the hell up. I'm trying to watch The Last of Us." There's that aspect of parenthood as well. But no, listen, that particular turn is I think a great highlight for Bella's performance. When Ellie, finally has to not only just drop her guard and kill a motherfucker like in a hardcore way, and then go into shock from doing that, and then break down from doing that. That's performance. That's why, like, it's undeniable. We're not going to talk about best or worst performances. These are the best performances you're going to get out of this show. These are award-winning performances. And what Bella's able to do between killing the guy, you know, because before that it's kind of the Ellie we knew, and then it's the Ellie that has to unleash all the rage and all the frustration and all the anger and all the terror and everything on David's face with a knife, like that part, and then go into shock, and then be comforted, and then be damaged. The next episode, Ellie's not okay from what just happened. Ellie's now different and changed and turned, and you feel it. You feel it in her performance. You feel it in Bella's performance. I go, shit, this is way more than Lady Mormont. This is way, way more than what Lady Mormont. And I liked Lady Mormont. There was nothing wrong with that character. It was kind of a one-note character. It was like, this is a tough little badass. Like, everyone's going to like rally around this character because of course we will. Ellie's a smarmy smartass who does that to put the walls up, who loves to read from a pun book, which can be annoying to some people, but also a little bit charming, to full-on rage kill mode, to let's back up and talk about, you know, having a crush on your best friend and then having to kill them because they're infected, to into full shock, to coming out of shock and into kind of aftershock, and then coming into like accepting love from Joel, who's Joel now is learning to love you as well, to going, all right, well, let's go into this hospital, do this thing so I can cure the world, and then find out, oh shit, actually they're gonna kill me. She didn't know that, but she does know afterwards. So I'm sorry, I'm going to divert into the actual final episode here. So she gets put under. They you know, Joel gets attacked because they don't know what he's all about. And then when he comes to, they're like, yeah, it's all great. She's getting prepped for surgery right now, where we're going to take her brain out. Well, they didn't go through that fucking gauntlet of hell for Joel to just go, okay, Joel's invested now. So he turns full-blown Charles fucking Bronson and mows down every fucking Firefly he can find to get back to this girl who is now everything. Now she's his world. The world doesn't matter. What matters is Joel and Ellie to Joel. So Joel goes and saves Ellie, unbeknownst to her. She's under anesthesia. He kills everybody he can find, including Marlene, who's known her since birth. And she wakes up in that car, and she kind of knows in the back of her head that Joel did something bad. But she's going to accept it anyway. That's fucking performance, Damon. That's what I'm fucking talking about. Like, if you didn't understand the depth and the weight of what fucking happened right in that fucking episode, in that little car ride at the very tail end of this 9-episode season, then you don't know what a good performance looks like. Bella Ramsey fucking knocked it out of the park. If these two don't win, we riot.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many. Like, there's a great scene in the previous episode where Ellie gets kidnapped by David, and Joel has been recovering from a stab wound, and he finally kind of she gets him better. She gets him medicine. She gets him penicillin. She gets him better. He finally recovers, and he's finally well enough to go after her, and he kidnaps 2 of the guys from this camp where she's been taken, and he's holding them. And we see, even in that, like, there's moments earlier in the season where Joel just kind of turns into a bit of the Terminator, but he's doing it for the purposes of survival in those moments, right? In the episode 8, when it's David's people, he stabs the dude in the leg, and he's like, you're going to show me where your camp is, or I'm going to pop your fucking kneecap off. In that moment, it's not about survival, it's about saving Ellie. And even though it's 2 parts of the same half of this guy who can just kind of turn into this badass Terminator, so to speak, or however you want to say it, his reasons for doing it are different. At first, it's just about survival. It's his own, his own survival and just getting by as best he can. By the end, he's doing it for her. And when he
Mm-hmm.
says that scene is just amazing. When he gets the location and the other guy goes, "I'm not telling you anything." He's like, "Don't worry, I believed him." And then he kills the guy with the pipe. It's just so great. But then at the end, he tells her about when he was going to commit suicide. Comes clean. Like he tried to kill himself after his daughter Sarah died. And he's like, I'm glad, she's like, I'm glad that didn't happen. He's like, I'm glad too. And she goes, I guess time heals all wounds. And he said, it wasn't time. Oh, when you realize
Great.
it was her. It was
Yeah.
Ellie. She was his purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Unbelievable. Just unbelievable all the way around. The performance, just.
Yeah, he's like, time. I've been doing this shit for 20 years. I'm going off the fucking rails. It was you that did it. That's fucking great. It's great stuff.
So good. Let's talk about favorite episode, because this is a show, as I said, serialized drama, but still a lot of procedural aspects to it where we do get individual episodes almost every single week. So, Patrick, what was your favorite episode in The Last of Us Season 1?
So I'm sure I'm probably stealing this episode from 90% of the audience, but I don't give a fuck because I got double the reasons why I wanted it. It's episode 3, which is I think titled "Long, Long, Long Time," and it is the story of Bill and Frank. This episode went fucking bonkers on the internet. Everybody was like talking about it. I actually saw it like a week late because I was busy. I've been traveling all over the fucking world. Don't even ask. I finally got to sit down with it. This is the story of Bill. Now, Bill is he's a survivalist.
He's the guy who, when the zombie apocalypse happens, he's like, yes,
he's so ready.
My time has come.
He's basically obsessed his entire life about the apocalypse. He's one of these hyper preppers. He's had everything ready. And when the zombie apocalypse sets, he's good to fucking go. He's fine. He's totally set up. And then he meets this wayward stranger who he does not trust one bit, named Frank, and they fall in love. And it's just a love story, basically, a love story in the apocalypse, where this wayward damsel in distress, Frank, runs up to an impenetrable fortress housed by basically a hermit named Bill, who's never really had much of a life. His whole life has been about prepping. They find love together, and it's a sweet, beautiful love. And they even have fucking arguments because they want to have friends over for dinner and shit like that. And Bill doesn't want all that. And it's a wonderful.
And that's how we get introduced to where they meet Joel and Tess. Like that's connected. Joel and Tess end up meeting Bill and Frank over the radio, and then Joel and Tess come to visit them, much to Bill's chagrin. But Frank's like, "This is amazing. We have friends."
Yeah, he's like, I don't want friends. It's just it turns into just this sweet little story about a couple. And by the way, in the video game, you may not know this, but Bill was an incredibly important function in the video game for providing weapons to Joel and Ellie. And of course he does that, like, because he has this insane cache in his basement of every fucking gun you could dream of. Man's a sharpshooter, et cetera, et cetera. So forget it. Like, he's armed to the teeth. They fall in love. They grow old together because this is a 20-year span. They're already kind of older when they meet, probably in their mid to late 50s when they meet. They're much older at the end of this apocalypse. And Frank is rather sick with what seems to be cancer or something like that. Obviously, in an apocalypse, they can't really take care of it. So he asks for one day to be their last day. It's fucking, it'll break your fucking heart. You want to talk about me crying? I almost fucking lost my shit during that. So they have a nice meal. Bill's a great cook. They have some wine. And it's understood that the wine is going to be poisoned, so that way Frank can have a lovely sleep for the rest of his days. And then Bill turns the tables and goes, "Oh yeah, I put just about as much to kill a horse in mine as well, because you were my world, and it's all like I got to live for you."
Let me pause you there, because we didn't do best line, but I still pulled best lines.
You did?
I did. So with that being said, here's the best line. Just talking one of the best lines the entire season, playing into your episode, Patrick.
This isn't the tragic suicide at the end of the play. I'm old. I'm satisfied. And you were my purpose. I do not support this. I should be furious. But from an objective point of view, it's incredibly romantic.
Oh,
So good.
I'm old. I'm satisfied.
Yeah.
You were my purpose. Oh my God.
So good, man. So fucking good. And that's how their story ends. And of course and Bill leaves his cachet of weapons to Joel. I kind of hope that comes back around. It doesn't seem like it will. Doesn't logically make sense why it would. But that was it. That was the story of Bill. And I think for the hardcore video game fans, they probably lost their minds at how great, like they just took a moment to give Bill his moment. Now, that's not the only reason I fucking chose this episode, Damon. You may know this about me, and anyone who listens to the show for a long time may know this about me. I'm a massive Parks and Rec fan. For a horror guy, I sure love me some fucking Parks and Rec. Like, I know that show backs and forths. And Nick Offerman, who plays Bill in this, played the very iconic Ron Swanson in Parks and Rec. This episode basically doubles as what would happen if Ron Swanson was in the apocalypse. It's literally like you're watching things going, yeah, Ron has that house. We already know that. We know he has a house that's completely ready for the apocalypse. We know he can do all these other things. We're basically watching Ron Swanson in the fucking apocalypse. And I know at least half the audience was like geeking out over that fact as well. And I was like, oh my God. And even the casting. Now, Ron is not gay in Parks and Rec, but I was like, if Ron Swanson was ever going to choose a man as his partner, Frank's the fucking guy. Like, they nailed that too. And I was like, oh my God. Like, so on a whole other level, episode 3 was that much more enjoyable to me.
Yeah, episode 3 is probably the best episode of the season, I'm not going to lie. But I did go in a different direction just to give us a little bit of variety here. And I picked episode 5, Endure and Survive. And that is the episode after Joel and Ellie have made it to Kansas City. They got ambushed by some shooters. They survived. And they end up meeting a young man named Henry and his younger brother, Sam. And Henry and Sam have been surviving, but as we learn, they survived because Henry was giving information to Fedra on the rebels who were kind of plotting an overthrow of the government, so to speak, because he's like, listen, my little brother needed medicine for leukemia, and they had it. So I don't really give a shit what you think about me ratting you out. I was going to save my little brother.
Yeah.
And so then we go into a bigger set piece where they agree to help Joel and Ellie escape Kansas City. They know the city, and they end up helping them. Of course, chaos breaks out. The rebels come to look for them because the rebels, after they take over the city, are desperate to find Henry because they know he turned on them. He knows they're the reason that they almost didn't win this battle. So they're coming after him full bore. They're coming after him with everything. And that's where we get probably our biggest set piece, action piece of the entire season, is when the rebels arrive. Joel acts as a sniper in a nest in a house, which is amazing. And then we get the explosion of zombies out of the bottom of this. They had trapped them underground. They finally break free after a truck crashes. And they all come out, and that's where we meet the bloater for the first time, which is the giant, just completely over-infected zombie who's got like giant, like tank-like armor built from that. And that's where we get our biggest action set piece the entire season, where the rebels are trying to fight back against the infected. Joel and Ellie are trying to escape with Henry and Sam. And then in the end, we learn that Sam gets infected. Oh my God, it's a brutally terrible scene when Ellie's like, my blood can save you, and it doesn't. And then Henry is forced to kill his own brother, and then Henry takes his own life. All in, we meet Henry and Sam for the briefest of moments in episode 4, and then we really get to know them in episode 5. It is, and this is also the 2 episodes with Melanie Linsky. Those 2 episodes were just so harrowing, but episode 5 in particular, again, you only spend 1 episode with Henry and Sam. And this was a little easier to sell you on because Sam's a little boy. Children are innocent by nature. But to see the heartbreak in Ellie's eyes when she tries to save him by putting her blood on the bite he received from one of the infected, and then the next morning he turns anyways, you see just the terror and like the I failed. And then Henry just, instinctively shoots his brother because that's what you do to infected. And he's just like, what did I do? What did I do? And then he just blows his own. I mean, it's just.
Yeah. It's for Henry, it's like it's kind of all for nothing, right? Like he sold himself. I'm not all for nothing, right? He wanted to buy some years for his brother Sam. But you feel all the weight of that, of the idea that it's like shit. Like we've been on the run, we've been in hiding this whole time, and that people have been on the hunt for us, and we learned how kind of hard line those particular rebels are. Like it's such a complicated, messy, and nuanced world that they live in, and then it all comes crumbling down in just a second, and it's fucking heartbreaking. It's just so heavy, and it makes me think like this would have taken 2.5 seasons on The Walking Dead. Not to make this a Walking Dead, shit poster episode, but that the kind of storyline we got in basically 2.5 episodes was like an epic saga in any other show, but it all felt earned. It was all there. It was all easily digestible. You understood where every single person was coming from. No one was like perfect in this situation. And it just ends on another reminder that like, A, nobody's safe in this world, and B, people are going to do what they're going to do to survive. And sometimes it's going to look ugly, sometimes it's going to look desperate, and sometimes it's going to be completely futile. And that's the heartbreaking aspect of it all. Like you get your heart broken like 10 times over in 9 episodes, because you realize like sometimes it's all for nothing because you're just doing your best to survive. And this particular episode accentuates that really well.
So from there, let's spin into best kill, because my best kill for the season actually comes from this episode. So I want to go ahead and go into that. Or excuse me, best death. I'm sorry, not best kill. Best death.
Best death.
Best death. Best death. Now, the deaths can, there's 2 ways to look at deaths in this show, because there are the very emotional deaths. I thought Tessa's death in episode 2 was really crazy. She sacrifices herself to save Joel and Ellie. She gets infected. And then, we see that creepy scene I mentioned earlier where the infected, like, basically tries to make out with her with the infection, which is really gross. And then she blows herself up. There are those. And then Bill and Frank, you could easily say that was the best because it was just so, just heartbreaking, but also, very loving and compassionate.
Yeah, very beautiful in its own way.
But the one I picked was actually from episode 5, which is when the bloater arrives and we meet Perry. Perry is played by the actor who actually played Tommy in the video game. And he is like Melanie Linsky's right-hand man. He's the lead of the soldiers of this rebel army. And this bloater is this giant, just giant infected tank of a monster comes pouring out of the ground, and you can't kill it because the armor of the infection is just so deep that like you just can't put a bullet in its head. And it just comes storming through the people, and Perry tries his damnedest to put this thing down. It doesn't die, and it grabs Perry and literally rips him in half, rips his face in half, rips him from jaw to jaw, and rips his head off. One of the nastiest kills, and that moment, again, we don't see the infected a lot in this show, but in that moment, I was kind of like, well, shit. This is just kind of lets you know how serious this situation is.
Oh yeah, no, that's a fucked up death. That's also where we get the death of what's her name, the leader of that group, Kathleen. Yeah, right. She gets killed in that one. Actually, that's as far as deaths go. That's probably one of the best stretches of really impactful deaths in this season. My best death comes deeper into the season, which we talked a little bit about in episode 8. The death of David. One of the most deserving deaths in the entire series, because Ellie runs into David. She's killed a deer to get some food for her and Joel, and she runs across David and one of his kind. And David, I almost wonder if he isn't named David after like David Koresh. He's got sort of a little cult. He fancies himself a preacher. He styles himself as such, but truth be told, he has manipulated this pandemic to become sort of a manipulator of people. and he's got this whole group of people under his thumb, and he's feeding them humans because they're pretty bad at hunting, and there's a scarce amount of food to be found. So out in his little compound way out there in the middle of nowhere, when people die, his butcher cuts them up and they feed them to unbeknownst to the rest of his clan. When he gets his eyes on Ellie, he likes her feistiness. He likes how tough she is and how smart she is. And he sees in her the perfect bride. Now, mind you, Bella Ramsey is actually 19 years old in real life, playing a 14-year-old in this show. So it's rather disgusting how he sees himself in having a future with Ellie, because she plays a very, very young, very innocent person in the show. And he's also evil and devious, right? So when Ellie finally manages to escape his clutches, he's not going to let her go without a fight, and he might as well just kill her and eat her, because that'll work too. And he's happy to let the whole place burn down. He's just fucking maniac of a person. Ellie unleashes hell on him, and he probably gets the most gruesome death. It's so gruesome the camera doesn't even bother to turn and show you what's left of him, because it's probably not much. And to me, that was a very satisfying death.
Very satisfying. Yeah, talk about a god complex. This guy had a god complex like you would not believe. And yeah, that was a very satisfying death. In terms of like one you're rooting for. You're like, good. This is just good. Great scene. That whole episode, I don't know, like I said, it's hard to pick one favorite episode because that one's also incredible. So yeah, that's a great death. Here's a fun one, because of course I mentioned at the beginning of the show that both Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey were on Game of Thrones. They actually never worked together because Pedro was only on one season and Bella didn't show up till a couple seasons later, so they never actually worked together. But they were both prominent characters and very famous characters on Game of Thrones. So here's a fun one, Patrick. Who is the best Game of Thrones character you would like to have as a road partner in The Last of Us? So you're traveling through the infected cordyceps infected zombie apocalypse. Who's your traveling partner from Game of Thrones?
This pick was so easy for me. And listen, you and I are both huge geeks for the Game of Thrones, and there is just a massive amount of characters to choose from. But I thought there would be none greater to have than the Hound. The Hound was one of my favorite characters in Game of Thrones. He was the brother of the Mountain. He was gruff. He was burned by fire. Wasn't a big fan of fire in particular. He was a smart ass, and he was also just a fucking killing machine. And he didn't give a fuck about nobody. And so to me, that was the perfect partner because he didn't want to blab all the time. I don't mind having quiet car rides. The Hound's perfect for that. And when it's time to get to killing, the Hound going to fuck some shit up. So I was like, this is the perfect guy to have. This is the absolute perfect guy to have on the road.
Yeah, the Hound's a good choice. He has one of my favorite lines in the entire show. Please forgive the language. I have to repeat it here because it cracks me up. And one of my favorite lines. So again, be forewarned, bad language here. When he's in a tavern and this guy is like trying to sell him on joining the army, and he's just like, he wants no part of this dude. He just wants him to shut up. And he goes, if any more words come pouring out of your cunt mouth, I'm gonna have to eat every fucking chicken in this place. It is this classic Hound. He's so good. Yeah, he's a great one. And actually, it's funny you mentioned the Hound. I went on the other side of this. I went with Brienne of Tarth.
I knew you would.
Not only is she a killing machine who actually kicks the Hound's ass, by the way.
Yeah.
She is
one of my favorite fucking moments in Game of Thrones, by the way, when they fought.
Fiercely loyal. One of the only people in this show who is fiercely loyal. So you know what? You're in a bad spot out in the zombie apocalypse. She ain't going to abandon you. She's going to save you. She's going to come after whoever's coming after you. She is the Joel, so to speak. She is going to come after you and save you. So I would bring in, because not only is she badass, she's total badass, but she's also fiercely loyal. So I went with her because that just seems like the ultimate traveling partner, because she will fuck some shit up and she will make sure you get to where you're going.
She was actually going to be my pick, and the only reason I didn't is because she tends to get emotionally attached to certain characters, and that could get you in trouble. So like in a situation with like Sam and Henry, I could see her getting us into more trouble because she wants to do the right thing. I think that's the big thing about Brienne, but she was like literally they were like neck and neck. I was like, these are the two characters I would definitely take. But there are a few other ones that I think would definitely be great. Like Jon Snow is a pretty damn good killer.
I thought about Braun, but then I was like, Braun could 100% get paid off. Like if David
Yeah,
pulls up and is like, dude, we got money, we'll pay you off in chickens or whatever. Braun's like, all right, I'm out.
yeah, Braun's for sale.
Yeah, he's for sale. Like I was like, this dude would be a killing machine, but he'll 100% abandon you when at the moment's notice. I also thought about, like, it wouldn't be good in the zombie apocalypse, but if I'm traveling, I want a good travel partner. Tyrion Lannister's a great conversationalist. Like, that's the dude you want there to, like, make you laugh and get wine and have fun, but he ain't going to save you too far if you get attacked by the infected, so.
He ain't going to save you. He's good at bargaining, which is something that could be helpful. There's a lot of Game of Thrones characters that could be really helpful in a show like The Last of Us.
Yeah. Let's talk about the way this series has been adapted, which is as a limited series or a long-running series. And I think we kind of mentioned earlier, The Last of Us is basically being premised as a limited series. They've renewed it for season 2, and the creators have said the second game, there's 2 games, Last of Us 1 and Last of Us 2. The second game will definitely take more than 1 season, probably 2 full seasons. But everyone's kind of speculated that's going to be at 3 seasons and we're out. They're only going to follow the story of the video game. They're not going to go beyond that. They're being very faithful to the source material. But again, I said there is a version of this where they could do a very long-running series. This could easily be a 8 or 9 season show without fail, because you could stretch the first season into 4 seasons without blinking an eye. So, Patrick, is The Last of Us better adapted as a limited series or a long-running series?
I mean, my vote is limited series. However, when I think about what you just said, basically, is like the first season could have easily been 4 seasons. Like, I think you could legitimately make this a long-running series. I think what you would have to do, and what is probably coming, and again, mind you, Damon and I have been talking about this entire show, having never played the video games and not really knowing those storylines. So some of you are tearing your hair out because it's like listening to 2 people talk about Lord of the Rings and having never read the books. That's basically what we're doing here. I think we are going to lose Joel probably next season. I'm almost sure of that. I think he's done next season. And I think Bella let it slip that she'll be 19 years old in the next season as well. So she'll be older. So I think you could do this as a long-running series, but you would have to introduce new characters and you'd have to get a pretty damn good reason for why we're following those characters. You'd have to establish that if you're going to make this a long-running series. And by the way, as long-running series go, maybe 7 seasons max. 5 to 7 max, not anything longer than that, and HBO wouldn't do that anyway. But as a limited series, let's pretend like, okay, we know we're going to lose Joel pretty soon, and then we're going to have time with Bella, and then or time with Ellie, and then we're going to figure this out. Either we're going to get a cure or we're not going to get a cure, and it's all going to come crashing down. Either way, I think the fans win.
Yeah, I think limited. If you would have asked me this question at the start, I would have said long-running series because you need so much more time to really develop these characters and, really flesh out the side characters who show up, whether we're talking about Tommy or Marlene, the Firefly lead or whatever. I would have said 100% this needs to be a longer-running series. And when it started, I actually had no idea they were just adapting the first season of the game, the first game into the first season. I had no idea. I just thought they were doing seasons. So at the beginning, I assumed they would be doing like 2 or 3 seasons based on the first game. I had no idea they were literally going, piece by piece on the video game. So the first season is the first game. When it was over, though, when we got to the end of episode 9, I was like, you know what? This works so well. Don't fuck with the formula. So I'm completely okay with the limited series because I don't feel cheated. I don't feel like I missed anything. I don't feel like, oh man, you cheated me out of knowing this character better or spending 3 episodes with Bill and Frank. Could we have done that? Absolutely. You could spend a whole season with Bill and Frank. But the thing is, that one episode was so emotionally taxing and so well done that I'm like, you know what? They don't need it. As I said, trim the fat, which is something they failed to do on Walking Dead and some other horror shows. They trim the fat. Limited series. I think 3 seasons probably and done, and I'm completely okay with that.
Yeah, I think I'll be okay with it too. I think it's going to rule either way. The way Craig Mazin and company have set this show up, it's going to give you what you need pretty much every episode. I don't think you're going to walk away feeling unsatisfied at all, and you're not going to feel like, wow, they really left us hanging. I don't think they will. It doesn't seem like they're going to do that.
So our last category, we've already talked this. We're not going to do. We usually end with "Is it scary?" But we've already kind of established this is a very well done horror show. I think that goes without saying. So our last one is our own survival here, Patrick. You and I in The Last of Us. Could we survive in The Last of Us?
Fuck me, man. I really don't know. And the reason I don't know is not because of the human element. Like that's what happens in so many horror movies and zombie apocalypse movies and shows. Is you're going to be going up against some pretty mean-spirited people, and I don't think you and I have a problem lopping a few shitheads off. I think that's going to be really easy for us. The question I have is like, can I survive these infected cordyceps motherfucking zombie weirdo fucking tank clicker screamer screecher, all these shits? They're really different, very advanced. I don't have a knowledge base for how to fight back against them. And so I do wonder if I wouldn't get bested by the infected.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat with the infected. I've always said that if the zombie apocalypse started, it would be like my time because I'm the guy who can like very much detach myself emotionally.
Yeah.
And like I'd always joke. I don't know if I should joke and say this, but like I always said, like if I was in The Walking Dead, I would be Negan. Like I would be the guy who would just like, fuck it, I'm taking over, and you're gonna follow me, and I'm gonna save you, but you're not gonna like the way I do it. I've always said like I'm like my time has come. I'm
Finally
a little bit Bill. I'm like, all right, I'm ready to go. But on the flip side, as you said, this kind of infected, the creativity of the infected there. I don't know if I could survive that, man. That's pretty harrowing. And I'm not a great shot. I'll be honest. I've shot guns. I'm not a great crack shot. So
I'm okay. I'm not great.
Yeah, so I'm not. I don't know if I'm the one who's gonna be pinpoint accuracy killing people. So yeah, you want a leader? You want a guy who's gonna get shit done in that regard? I got you covered. I will be that in the zombie apocalypse. But you want me to be the guy being Joel out in the front? No, I ain't surviving that. I ain't gonna lie. I'm not gonna pretend that I would. So yeah, two sides. You want me as a leader? I'll get you through. I'll do some really terrible things, but I'll get you through. You want me to survive out in the wild with Joel? No, I ain't making it. So
I just figured out how you and I can survive. This cordyceps infection happens. It starts going. You and I, we go to the Lotrimin plant, wherever the fuck it's based, and we steal a tanker full of Lotrimin. Yeah. we mow these fuckers down everywhere we go.
Absolutely. The ultimate athlete's foot. All right. That is our episode for this week. Obviously, want to say a big thank you to everyone that tunes into the show each and every week. We appreciate that. Obviously, we'll be back next week getting back on the horror movie kick, but go watch The Last of Us. It's an incredible show. HBO Max, 100% worth your time. If you can't tell, Patrick and I absolutely love this series. Want to say a big thank you to everyone that tunes in each and every week. Make sure you check us out on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and of course over on my website, nerdcoremovement.com. And don't forget, we now have a YouTube channel. Just YouTube, search Rewind of the Living Dead. You can also hit us up on our social media channels. We've been getting a lot of great messages from you guys on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead. Send us messages, send us suggestions you have for movies you'd like us to review. We always love that. We've actually been keeping a catalog of things we want to review, so please keep sending us those suggestions. We love it. You can also email us at rotlivingdead@gmail.com. That's rotlivingdead@gmail.com. And you can also hit us up on our own personal social media accounts. I am at Damon Martin, and you are?
At Director Patrick.
Want to say a big thank you as always for everyone that tunes into the show. We will see you next week for another edition of Rewind of the Living Dead. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you then.
Peace.